Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Jazakallah khair for coming to our show or watching our show today, which is a special show because I have a special guest and we're going to be talking about Pakistan. And is it possible that Pakistan could win an all out war with India, as well as understanding the current conflict that's taken place between India and Pakistan and the current supposed ceasefire that's also meant to be in place? Today we've got brother Bilal Khan. Bilal Khan is a military expert, analyst, whose work has been cited in various academic journals, media outlets. So we're very fortunate to have Bilal Khan to give us his expert understanding and opinion in regards to this particular subject. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Jazakallah khair, Bilal, for coming. I don't know if there's anything more that I should be saying about yourself.
No, that's good.
Okay, well, we'll dive in, inshallah. So, Bilal, first question is the ceasefire holding?
Yeah. So basically, and based on the assessment so far, it is broadly holding. Of course, there are reports of on the ground, like such as line of control of like shelling and that kind of stuff. But at a strategic broad level, it is holding. We have to be careful not to misconstrue. Like right now, it is true that both sides are shuffling and mobilizing their forces, but we have to be careful not to misconstrue preparation for actual hostilities. Remember, these are two professional militaries with a lot of experience in fighting real wars between other countries, right? Mainly between each other. So they understand that there is a risk that the ceasefire will break down for whatever reason. So they need to be prepared. For them, a ceasefire does not mean like armistice and permanent peace. They're not naive. So yes, they will be moving tanks forward to the border. They will be on high alert. The air defenses are all active because they're still in a very warlike situation in their planning right now. So we have to be careful not to misconstrue when two big militaries start shuffling a bit that they're about to fight. No, it's more they have to be ready to fight. However, on the broadly speaking, at this moment right now, it is holding the ceasefire.
It seemed to me that the ceasefire came in quite soon, quite rapidly, especially on that Saturday when Pakistan reacted. By later on that evening, certainly UK time, there seemed to be a ceasefire in place. So what prompted the supposed urgency, or what am I misconstruing that there wasn't an urgency, and what prompted US getting themselves involved?
Yeah, so one of the narratives, and I mean, we should touch upon the whole narrative war as well. But one of the narratives is that Pakistan's response on May 10th basically prompted India to go and essentially run to the US to, get a ceasefire. I don't agree with that assessment at all, because the US officials, they basically said that they had to act and make sure a ceasefire was in place because of alarming intelligence. Now, what that alarming intelligence has been up to dispute. If you just follow the Indian side, they'll claim that they're on the verge of basically dismantling or creating some sort of problem with Pakistan's nuclear deterrence. You have other people saying, well, maybe both sides are ready to go and fire nukes. I disagree with both assessments. First, in terms of the whole thing of India, threatening Pakistan's nukes, if that had been the reality, America would not have stepped in because America historically did not want Pakistan to have nuclear weapons to begin with. This is literally part of their policy. They prevented Pakistan from entering the nuclear suppliers group. So Pakistani entities are constantly sanctioned for any connection to the nuclear program. So if India was genuinely on the verge of dismantling Pakistan's nuclear capability, America would have let that happen. So I doubt that was the case. That being said, in terms of the potential use of nuclear weapons, it's unclear if that had been the case. But that does connect to a bigger issue, I think, for America is basically destabilization. And what they mean by that is a situation that would basically harm US interests. And this is where it's really important to connect the de escalation that happened on May 10th to what was happening within Pakistan up to that point. Because within Pakistan, during this conflict, public opinion was basically mobilizing to such a degree and it was so united. It was quite astounding to see. But it was united on basically fighting India, right? And the people were expecting a response for 48, 72 hours before May 10th because they kept getting hammered by India up until that point. So people were asking, where is the response? Where is the response? Where is the response? And when May 10th happened, had the Pakistani military leadership delayed any further, they could, in my assessment, they could have been in a lot of danger internally. So that's why they had to respond on May 10th. However, it was that entire framework, the entire situation that likely brought the U.S. to focus in and de-escalate quickly. Otherwise, for lack of better words or lack of a better term, things could have gotten out of control within Pakistan, and that's the real issue. Because regardless of the
Yeah.
outcome of any potential war, what America's worried about is the status quo in Pakistan going to stay the same or no. If a total war with India was to happen, regardless of whether Pakistan wins or loses, chances are, based on this ceasefire agreement, chances are that things could have changed within Pakistan, basically.
But in terms of the actual response, why did it take so long for Pakistan? Talking about 4 days of constant barrage from India. And was this a tactical reason?
So let's dial back to May 6th. When India began its onslaught on May 6th, the Pakistani military leadership came on TV to announce that the attack was happening and that they would respond on, at their time and place of their choosing. However, within minutes of the Indian response, the people within the Pakistani military's, operational layer, so that's like the officers, the pilots, people on the boots on the ground, the field personnel, they began responding immediately to the point where it did catch the Indian side off guard, and they were basically off their footing. Right, this is where the accounts of Indian planes getting shot down over within India started happening. This is where scores of cruise missiles were getting intercepted by Pakistan's air defenses. Yes, some did break through and hit, but we have to look at it from the context of a wartime situation where those were the ones that broke through, but there are many others that did not break through. So the Pakistan military, in its immediate retaliatory, or let's say defensive posture, was able to stop and contain the damage quite a bit in that initial period, and also inflict some damage within the Indian forces. However, right after that, in the subsequent 48, 72 hours, the Pakistani military leadership kept delaying, because they kept saying, we want to de-escalate, we want to de-escalate, we want to get the U.S. on the table, we want diplomacy to work. In that period, India was able to kind of reorganize itself, move its most valuable assets further east into the center, leaving largely empty air bases and facilities, which on May 10th, conveniently enough, was when Pakistan began attacking those facilities, right? So a lot of those air bases like Udhampur were basically empty. So that was the Pakistani retaliatory response on May 10th. So that wasn't the thing that, again, my assessment is that the U.S. was concerned about, because they knew that Pakistan wasn't going to hit much, because India didn't have much of anything to begin with. It was the risk of what an all-out war could entail in the region.
In terms of, because we heard on that, I think it was the first day, 5 jets, Indian jets, including the Rafale French-made jet, were shot down. How credible are these stories? And also, if they are credible, at least if one of them is credible, then what does that say about Pakistan's Air Force?
Yeah, so I would say this, before even getting into those losses, I would say the Pakistan Air Force has more than proved itself on May 6th, simply because it was able to thwart and disrupt an Indian attack and put India on the back foot during those critical hours. Because when India was going in there, they were likely assuming that the Pakistan Air Force would be a no-show, right? That, yeah, they were able to engage in their strikes, then they would have some time to move their forces back. Pakistan will retaliate, in, what we saw on May 10th. There'll be no significant damage on the Indian forces, and then the ceasefire will be called. What happened in reality was that on May 6th, on that day, the Pakistan Air Force rose up, retaliated, was able to shoot down a number of Indian aircraft, 4 to 5, according to various different reports, within Indian soil. So they were able to show an ability to intercept across the border, which were all critical things that India likely did not properly account for, in which they basically got a bloody nose for, basically. So in that sense, the Pakistan Air Force vindicated itself, or more than it basically proved its mettle, essentially, for lack of better terms. In terms of the specific Indian losses or specific Pakistani losses, the problem with this is that we cannot tell with any level of certainty. So, Pakistan's going to say it's shot down 3 Rafales or whatever. We just don't know out of certainty. So we're relying on third-party, basically, verification and assessments. And right now, what we can say is that with different varying levels of probability, that certain things were shot down, certain things were not shot down. So, for example, with a high level of probability we can say that at least one Rafale was shot down, because we have CNN, Reuters reporting that, hey, French officials came to them and said one was shot down for sure. We know that Indian officials at different points during the May 6th engagement said that, hey, wreckage fell on our side of the border. Obviously, India didn't rush to say there was a Pakistani planes. They said, "Oh, we don't know what the origin are." So there's a good probability that those were likely Indian planes. What they were, what type, we don't know. Moreover, Pakistan, unfortunately, and this is where we get into that whole war of narratives distraction, as I would like to call it, is basically, in the absence of any territorial exchanges or real results on the ground, both sides are trying to tell the third party observers, the world, that they were the better fighters, the better, the winners, based on what vanity metrics, like how many fighters we shot down, how many bases we hit. These are vanity metrics. They don't mean anything, because what matters in a real war is, like, as we see unfortunately with Israel and with the Zionists and the Israelis in Gaza, is that they're clearly measuring it based on territorial gain, right? That's how you measure it. It doesn't matter how much you lose. Unfortunately, what both sides are going to do in India and Pakistan is that by basically saying that we shot down more, they're also going to hide their actual information. So we will not objectively know with certainty which side lost more or lost less. However, we do know, at least based on the May 6th engagement, that the Pakistan Air Force did come out of it, whether you want to say victoriously, but they came out of it quite favorably in disrupting the Indian attack and also just, shooting down several Indian fighter aircraft.
See, what was interesting about what we saw in the last week or so is normally there's a complete disparity, an asymmetrical warfare that's taking place when Muslims are attacked, whether that was the West when they invaded and attacked Afghanistan or Iraq, or what we're seeing currently with Israel and Palestine. Do you think, and you get the impression that Indians amongst the hawks in India, that they were expecting something similar, that they were just going to roll Pakistan over, and were they then surprised in terms of what response that they did receive, particularly on May 6th?
Absolutely. They went in with the mentality that Pakistan, based on the way leadership typically acts, they weren't expecting an immediate response during their operation. They were expecting a situation where they would get away with their attack, and then Pakistan would respond at time and place of its choosing, which would be conveniently just enough time for India to move its assets back in a way, make sure they're safe. However, what happened on May 6th was not that. What happened was that the professional class of the Pakistan military, Air Force especially, rose up and basically began intercepting India right on the spot, and were able to thwart the attack. India was on May 6th on the back foot, and had the Pakistani military leadership capitalized on that on May 6th itself, they could have likely done significantly more damage, because at that point, India's main aircraft in the region were in the air. That's when if you're the Pakistan army, you would maybe potentially capitalize on that by hitting their air bases with your missile strikes, so that those Indian aircraft cannot readily land in those areas. You force them to make a decision. Do they want to keep pressing the attack on Pakistan, or just jettison their munitions and go east, right? At that point, would India have enough air cover at that point to be able to defend from a land incursion? So these are the things that a more hawkish Pakistani military planner would have exploited. But what happened was, after May 6th, was that the Pakistan military leadership said, we will, again, wait for our counter response. Wait for it. Yeah, everyone was waiting for it. So was India. That's why they prepared for it. And that was where it was basically, there was tactical brilliance on the part of Pakistan on May 6th, on the part of Pakistan on May 6th, with strategic blunder on subsequent days.
That's amazing that you say that, because effectively what you're saying is that on May 6th, India was expecting, very little resistance, attack based on their initiative, catch Pakistan by surprise. And what you're saying is actually on May 6th, India was caught by surprise in terms of the defensive response of Pakistan, including, certainly at least one third-party confirmed report of the downing of an Indian jet. But you're then saying that if Pakistan really wanted to on May 6th, they could have launched a counterstrike that could have really severely dented India's military operation. Am I getting that right?
Correct. because that was the moment where India was so focused on that initial strike. They were definitely not prepared. I mean, they were evidently not prepared for the defensive retaliation. So rationally, you would extend that to assume that we're not going to be prepared for an offensive counteroffensive during their own operation. Because remember, their planes were geared to engage in an offensive strike on Pakistan. If your air forces block that situation at that specific moment, that creates an opening for your army to go in and exploit, even if it's for a few hours, the lack of Indian air coverage against them, which they can exploit to deprecate things like air bases so that Indian planes can't easily land. They can go and hunt down air defense systems so that your air force can expand its coverage. They can do so much within those critical few hours, which again was not exploited because that's not, unfortunately, the way the Pakistan strategic leadership thinks. Right? They are there, as you saw by their own words, to give diplomacy time, to de-escalate, to give diplomacy time, and that's how they approached it. It was not from the approach of which India was going in for, but it was to basically for blood, Pakistani civilian blood, right? Whereas Pakistan should have gone in there with the mentality of, existential survival. They control our water. We need to get that back. We need to grab more of their territory so we can build some strategic depth. Like this is how real independent powers think. Like you saw it in Russia when they went to Ukraine. You see it with China when they try to basically insert themselves in the Malacca Straits and the South China Sea. We see it with Tel Aviv as they try to encroach and take over the West Bank and Gaza, right? Like it's everyone gets to do it except Pakistan and Muslims apparently. But that's what we have. We
Could
don't
you
have
explain?
hawks, evidently.
Yeah. Could you explain to me the difference between, I mentioned it myself, but symmetrical and asymmetrical warfare? And then after that, could you explain as well whether this was symmetrical in that sense
It was
between India?
symmetrical because basically India went in.
So just Bilal, just explain to the audience the difference between symmetrical and asymmetrical warfare as well.
Yeah. So in a lot of conflicts, especially between countries and let's say Muslim majority areas, we typically see an asymmetry, which is where let's take the example of what's happening in in Palestine, for example. It's like you have one side with organized air power, military power, naval power, basically supported by deep logistical infrastructure through alliances and what have you, basically beating on unarmed people without just barely just militia tier capabilities, who can only inflict insurgent attacks, maybe wide scale ones, but nonetheless insurgent attacks. Like they cannot, like even the October 7th attack, they did fundamentally break down the Tel Aviv's ability to govern. Did it break down its military? No, right? It just created maybe caused a lot of casualties, but at the end of the day, it was like nothing significant, maybe except in the sense of people's psyches. But on the ground, nothing changed. So, except for the fact that Tel Aviv used it to basically beat on Gaza, basically. So that's the asymmetry. When we talk about symmetrical, is when a military force goes in and then it meets an opposing military force of similar capability. Now, the opposing military force might be smaller, it might have older equipment, but nonetheless, there's a level of symmetry which basically stretches the offending powers' resources, creates margin of significant loss, and puts them on a back foot where they can make very significant errors in their operations, which could be exploited. This is what we saw on May 6th. India went in with dozens of aircraft ready to engage in a full-scale strike. It was scripted, it was ready to go. Suddenly, Pakistan Air Force comes in and basically intercepts them, stops their strike, and then starts knocking out their aircraft, which Pakistan says were the specific ones were launching munitions into Pakistani territory. They went after those ones first, right, across the border. So basically, they were able to intercept them while they were within Indian territory. So they didn't even respect the Indian border at that point. So that's when you have basically a symmetrical fight, which two comparable capability, two standing military forces. This is what that kind of fight looks like. What was the result? Yeah, India killed a few dozen Pakistani civilians, which is unfortunate. But they could not extend that to hundreds of thousands, which was the aim, because we see the wreckage of their cruise missiles on the ground that were shot down while they were going towards their targets. Right, that is what they were not able to achieve. So that's basically what it looks like when you have two symmetrical opponents.
So could you explain then in the context of the Pakistan Air Force, because There's lots that have been discussed about JF17, what they are, and in terms of their capabilities, and the fact that they were able to down at least one Rafale, French military aircraft.
Yeah, it's not just the JF17, but Pakistan also has the Chinese J10. So both of these are basically what we say just modern contemporary fighters. I mean, they have the same level of technology that you would find in a Western fighter. The only difference is that they're Chinese origin technologies. So I think until this point, people would basically have like a bit of a refrain or maybe be a bit skeptical. Like, is the Chinese stuff any good? Is the question. However, now we have it in the conflict, an actual like real world conflict where, yeah, it proved to be pretty good because it shouldn't surprise you to begin with because China is the number one, two industrial power. It is a technological, scientific R&D powerhouse. Like the whole world, including the America up to this point, relied on Chinese engineers and technologists to help them produce their, consumer goods, and even rely on the Chinese for some military inputs, like rare earth material, like refined materials and that kind of refined earth metals and that kind of stuff. So the idea that Chinese equipment would, be surprisingly good shouldn't have been a surprise to begin with. Like the all of the I would say all of the ingredients were already there. It was just a lack of real world data and experience that the Chinese didn't have because they never fought a real war, right, against a pure military. But now they're going to have access to the data from the Indo-Pak conflict. That data is going to go back into the Chinese, R&D machine, and then the next wave of Chinese munitions and technologies are going to be even more improved, basically. But yeah, the J17 is a modern fighter. It has current day technology within it. Same with the J10. People go into the whole generation, 4.5 generation. That's like technical stuff. I would just say that look, wherever it's in the JF17 or the J10, it's like basically at par with most of what the Western world even is operating today, with the exception of the next generation stuff, like the stealth fighters and that kind of stuff.
Yeah. So it's like what F16 with modifications. It's on that level.
I would say actually the Pakistani JF17s have now exceeded the F16s, at least the ones that Pakistan operates in their technological capabilities. So, for example, the JF17s in Pakistan, the Block 3, which they call it, it has what we call an active electronically scanned array radar. So Pakistan's older F16s, they don't have that because they've been locked to an early 2000s configuration. They haven't been upgraded. Who knows? After this, America might think about it because they need that PR win in the future in the Block conflict. But otherwise, those F16s are in a much older configuration. Whereas the newer JF17s, they basically use technology that the latest F16s are using now. So, right. So that's the way to put it. Like the way maybe I would describe it is like this. Like imagine you have like two cars, right? They both have automatic. They both have like a same type of automatic. They both have fuel efficiency capabilities. They have all this. They have Apple CarPlay, whatever. Like they both have the same thing. Just one claims to have like certain branding on it, and claims to be of higher performance because it has a deeper bass level, whereas the one you're driving just gets the job done, and it works the same way. That's the way I would look at it with the JF17 and let's say like Rafale or F16.
Yeah. So then, if that's the case, then what's the deciding factor in air combat?
So air combat is incredibly complex. In fact, the current generation of air combat that we've entered into is what the experts would call systems of systems warfare, meaning that you have two meta systems which comprise of individual systems within them, and those individual systems are also systems in themselves. Like a fighter plane is a system. Then you have 5 fighter planes. You have 5 systems which are then hooked into a bigger system of like networking and electronic warfare and satellite intelligence and all these other elements that all have to come into play. And then you have people who have to sort and manage this data and understand what's going on and have a very high level of awareness in real time and then make those critical decisions on the moment. So you have these two systems of systems just literally collide for the first time in world history. That's what happened. And so in these situations, you're going to lean on a lot of X factors, which no one could have controlled, right? It's just things that are out of your control, which then you exploit. So, for example, the fact that perhaps Indian aircraft, we go by their own claims, Indian aircraft are configured for mostly air-to-ground missions, not air-to-air. Well, Pakistan could have exploited that completely because then the Air Force the Pakistan Air Force not only would have had an advantage in shooting down Indian aircraft because they couldn't fight back from an air-to-air standpoint, but then they could have pressed forward, right, and started aiming to capture territory and build their own strategic depth. So these are X factors you basically exploit. And likewise, the next factor on India's side that worked to its favor was the delays of the Pakistani leadership in retaliating. So India exploited those X factors by moving its assets back, clearing out its northwest air bases, basically. And then when the Pakistani strikes happened, they were frankly inconsequential.
So I just want to move tact a little bit because I want to get into more of the discussion about the possibility of a real all-out war with ground offensive, etc. But I just want to slightly talk about the discussion about the Indus Water Treaty and why is that so significant this time around, that this has now become almost beyond the discussion of Kashmir.
Yeah, so put it simply, Pakistan relies on the water flowing in from the Himalayas on India's side of the border. Those waters, you cannot change geography. I know people will say, well, why didn't Pakistan build dams and more dams and barrages? Which is true. But the problem is the water source still comes from India. Like it's still, we cannot change physics and geography. Like it's literally how it works, right? That those water sources emanate from within India. Right? There's no amount of dam building that could have changed that. I mean, you can better regulate it, but you cannot change it, right? So what India's over the years built enough infrastructure now that they've likely concluded that they can now control the water flows much more reliably than before. So now they decide to exploit it. Now, there's still a lot of debate whether they have the ability to store all that water. So for at least for the short term, it doesn't affect Pakistan as much. But now moving forward, by walking away from the Indus Water Treaty, India has basically signaled that they will start working towards controlling that water. So how that affects Pakistan is that essentially, 70 to 80% of Pakistan's agriculture relies on those water flows. And this is not just, I think this might, hopefully, if you're a Pakistani, you're hoping this might have been a strategic miscalculation by India in the sense that India just looked at it from the economic standpoint, saying that, look, if we weaken Pakistan's economy, they will weaken their military, they'll then be weaker, right? However, the risk with this kind of thinking is that now you've taken the Pakistan landed elite, the agriculturalists, the feudal lords, who rely on this water, and you've now tied their interests, their economic interests, to an external security problem, which is a very dangerous link to establish. What India has effectively done is that they've taken the most important or one of the most important political classes in Pakistan, and they've tied their economic interests to a foreign security issue, which is never that link was never there. See that if you were a feudal landlord in Pakistan, right, what happens in India was never your concern until now. Until now, India, you've now created this link. And in any other country, like from Russia, America, France, Canada, even like any other country, when you create this link, it's very dangerous because now you've basically told this group, this elite, which runs both the political and economic side of Pakistan, that hey, if you want to survive, you're going to need to deal with this water issue. And there's only one of two ways that's going to happen. So one way is, and this is unfortunately could be a risk from the Pakistani side, is that they capitulate, right? They say, okay, we need water access. We're going to do whatever India, and by extension, basically, we want to litigate this. We want to bring in the UN. That means America. We want America to enforce the treaty, whatever. Well, what is America going to ask you to do? They're going to ask you to disarm your nuclear weapons. Like it's very clear. Like there's no ifs or buts. Right? This is the leverage they're going to use on you. However, if you take this route of capitulation, it's guaranteed defeat because even if you disarm, even if you do everything, you can look at what's happening to the Palestinians. You can do everything, but you're still not going to control the water. The water control will still be within India. So if they decide, hey, we want this part of Punjab, then they can take it because they'll just cut you off from the water. So if they have this awareness, that leads them to option two, which is, confrontation. And that's the miscalculation I think every Pakistani is hoping India made. Because if, maybe not in this generation, maybe the next generation, maybe the younger ones, if those future agricultural elites decide that they need to confront India, that's a dangerous combination. Because now you've basically created the seeds of a real hawkish disposition within Pakistan. like a genuine hawkish one. Like up till now, the hawkishism in Pakistan was very contained. I mean, wherever you might have heard in Indian media, what have you, it was nothing close to what you have with the RSS and what have you, right? Because that link of survival and defeating India was never made. It was always about Kashmir. It was about like if you just gave Kashmir to Pakistan, then until this point, Pakistan would have been fine with India. To be honest, like let's be frank, right? Had Kashmir been made part of Pakistan, Pakistanis would not have cared what was happening in India. But now you create this water issue, which actually is above Kashmir. Like, even if you gave Kashmir to Pakistan, it still doesn't solve the water issue. So now you've created this deeper problem, right? Which, I mean, alhamdulillah, I would say, like, in one sense, with Pakistanis, they have this awareness, and I think the future elites might have this awareness. So in that sense, it could be a very big long-term miscalculation on the Indian side to create that link and to begin seeding those hawkish dispositions in Pakistan as well, which could then, especially after this conflict, where you've shown that you're willing to, attack Pakistani civilians, it's not going to be forgotten for a while.
But so one thing that people suggest or state is that it's an empty threat that India's making. They're unable to store all that water. It will just end up flowing into Pakistan anyway. So it's just an empty threat at this moment in time.
Thing is, if it was an empty threat, India wouldn't have made it. Like, you have to understand, like, with the Indian side, is that they make real threats, right? Yes, they cannot store it today. But the problem is that by walking back from the Indus Water Treaty, they're going to work towards being able to store it. Like, you're not concerned with what they're able to do today. You're concerned about the long-term ramifications of it. And you need to get ahead of it as soon as possible. So the storage capacity will be made. Like, at the end of the day, India is an industrial power. Like, they have the ability to make those dams, right? This is not a thing that's trivial for them. They can do it, and they will do it now. They just needed to be able to, like, remove whatever sense of limits they had from the treaty, maybe because they didn't want to look bad. But now they've walked away the treaty. They've basically removed the treaty as a factor. Now they're going to begin building that capacity. So yes, for the current Pakistani elites, it might not matter to them. But their children, their grandchildren who are going to inherit those lands, this is going to be a big problem for them. And this is where I would say that long-term miscalculation might be something in Pakistan's favor, in a sense, where the future people who decide who gets to be in government, who gets to rule the country, are going to make this a critical part of their interests, unless they capitulate. Which is, again, unfortunately, the Pakistan cricket team, can go either way. So Pakistan could go either way. But yeah.
So obviously, the title of this stream is about: is it possible for Pakistan to defeat India? Saying what we've already said, and there's a lot even more that could be said. What would actually happen if there was a legitimate all-out warfare? Because what you're basically saying is that, look, you've got the Kashmir issue on the one hand, you've got the Indus Water Treaty, and the Indus Water Treaty actually affects the whole of Pakistan directly or indirectly. It's going to affect the whole of Pakistan. And so Pakistan has to make a choice now, which is effectively, do we capitulate or do we try to secure this water resource, which India has now threatened Pakistan with and is wanting to actually follow through with that threat as well. So if Pakistan was to try to, maybe take control militarily of this water source, how effective, what's the potential, what's the possibility that Pakistan could do that?
So one issue with the question, which is a correct question, but the issue is that basically we have to frame it in terms of who's in charge of Pakistan. Like, the question is, like, if you're going to think that the current leadership with its knowledge and capabilities, and you've seen during this conflict, is going to be able to mount a war against India and win, it's very unlikely in the way they're operating, right? Because everything they've done up to this point is like signaling defeat. The fact is, on May 6th, you had a chance to engage in a large-scale counteroffensive on that time, but you intentionally delayed, allowing India the space to attack you. Right? Even during the ceasefire talks, India snuck in a few strikes. You'd think rationally that you would just walk away from the ceasefire talks at that point, saying that India is not serious. So this leadership, in its current capacity, is not the stewards to handle that question. However, let's say hypothetically, generation shifts, a new leadership does come in with a very clear link between their national survival and the water issue, that they're going to take all the precautionary steps at both the strategic level and tactical levels to make sure that they're prepared to fight. So that could include, for example, one of the weaknesses that Pakistan saw this time was that its lack of strategic depth was a disadvantage. The fact is that you can just fly up and start hitting your cities without even crossing the border, which is a big problem, and also by extension your bases. So they would think is that, okay, we need to build strategic depth. There's only one way we can do that. It's to look west. We're going to need to make peace with Afghanistan. We need to come to an equitable solution that will allow our planes to safely land there and operate from there. And that's going to involve, coming to terms with our own injustices, our own problems that we've caused the Afghan people. And we're going to need to come to an agreement with them and bring them into our system, basically. Right? Otherwise, there's no other way. Like, you cannot change geography. You cannot change your geography, but you can change your map. Right? That's pretty much the thing they have to come to terms. And this is something that they've thought about, right? Clearly, the whole concept of strategic depth was coined by Pakistani military planners in the 80s. So they clearly understood this. So clearly, the seeds for this is there. It's just you need brave people to come in and come to terms with the reality. And there are ways to do that. Like, look, you can talk to the Afghan farmers and agriculturalists directly and tell them, look, work with us and we will give you unrestricted access to Gwadar port. That port's barely being used. You can use it, no exit fees on any of your agriculture. You can export to the world, right? You can live in Gwadar city. You can build your urban centers there. Like, do what you want, right? You can have prosperity that way. So you have to, that's one step. Second step is you need to get your industrial system into play, right? You need the ability to produce and scale up your munitions production to handle a full-scale war. That means you're going to start putting in investments towards that and ensure that's there. And number three is, you're going to start to actively work to weaken India. Even if you cannot engage them militarily up front, you're going to look at things like, okay, like, how do we destabilize the situation? Like, you're going to come to terms and accept that. Like, the thing is, like, what Pakistan's leadership has done is trying to play this good citizen role where no one believes them to be a good citizen, no one wants them to be a good citizen, right? So if you're under this reality, then just look at what everyone else is doing. The ones who decide, okay, you know what, if I can't make you like me, I'll make you respect me. And I'm going to accept that narrative you have about me, right? You say that we support militant groups, okay, sure, but you're the ones who are occupying land. That's your, so you eat the results from that, right? You're going to accuse us of interfering with your internal affairs. Yeah, that's what we do. We interfere. We have national interests. We're going to pursue those national interests anywhere in the world. No one is safe from our national interests. So you have to take this, like, this is the leadership has to show that it's there. It means business, and it's not going to care if you accuse it of being A, B, C, D, because frankly, this is what your enemies have come to terms with. They don't care if you accuse them of being Hudud or whatever. They don't care. Why do you care? So this is where, if you have that kind of leadership in Pakistan, which just does not take what the world says of it seriously, which says to the international order that, look, you guys are predisposed against us. Your courts only work half the time, and it happens to work for only one group of people. Let's be honest here. So we're not going to listen to you, right? You don't respect our borders. Why are we going to respect your borders, right? In fact, like, no one respects you. You can even just change the entire narrative entirely. Say that no one respects the international order. You can play those narrative games in that targeted way by saying that no one respects it. Why are you forcing people? Even Trump doesn't respect it. You yourself don't respect the own order you built. Like, you build a Lego castle and you just torn it apart. This is how you treat the world. So if you have a leadership that takes both leadership domestically and internationally, then you will be prepared, well equipped, and you'll be operating at a level much higher than India is. That's the leadership that's going to win. But this current group, no. Like, you look at the Pakistan defense minister on TV, it's like, I mean, is this the guy you want representing you on the international stage, speaking on your behalf? Can he represent himself in a court of law? I mean, this is the thing. It's like, this is the issue. So this is the approach that Pakistan's going to need to, the Pakistanis, I'd say the Pakistani people need to now envision for themselves. Like, what is the leadership that you want, right? What should it look like? What values should it reflect? How is it that everyone else in the world can have a leadership that reflects their values, their beliefs, but not except you? Like, the Hindu society can have a Hindutva regime. Jewish society can have a Jewish regime. American society can have a Christian far right regime. Everyone gets to do the thing, but you don't get to do the thing. And then you yourselves tell yourselves you can't do the thing. And that is the question. I have a hawkish disposition, and I think that's where Pakistanis need to now start thinking: is how do we fly with the hawks? How do we fly at that altitude and
So
take that
one
approach?
one of the things that are thrown back is to say that Pakistan can't afford warfare. That if I'm talking about financially, economically, they're just a broken country in terms of financially.
So what's interesting is that when India basically threatened the agricultural elite, it's a very good thing to look at how much they contribute to the economy. So the agricultural elite, they contribute around 20 to 30% of the GDP, but they only put in about less than 1% of the tax revenue. Meaning that there's a group in Pakistan which has been underpaying. It's been getting rent-free security for decades, right? Who's been sitting on land that should have been taxed. This land has been historically taxed from the time Muhammad bin Qasim came into this territory to the Mughals. This land has always been taxed until these guys got 1947, right? Then they've been living tax-free effectively. So you have this. Now imagine imagine. I think in the time of the Delhi Sultanate during the Mongol invasion, land taxes went up to 50-60% because of a war. So you factor in 20-30% of Pakistan's GDP, take 15% of that. Take half of that. So there's war money. The ability to generate war funds is there in some aspect. Now this is a very raw calculation. It's not there's going to be more to that. We don't use direct GDP figures and what have you. But the point being is that the resources, the Pakistan is a very undertaxed society. Tax to GDP ratio is below the global average. It's below the regional average. Meaning that, and it's not because the people are not paying. The people are paying too much. It's the ones who hold the resources, the land, the major assets in the society. They're not paying enough. This is the problem. So, and this is why Pakistan is constantly taking out debt to basically subsidize their living. Right. The other part is, for example, Pakistan's fiscal budget. Around 50% of it goes into debt servicing. $30 billion a year debt servicing into what? Support bonds and sukuks and this and that, foreign investors. So again, if you're a hawkish Pakistan, it's kind of funny. You maybe have to bring a Trump kind of mentality to this, but I'm explaining it in very Trumpian terms because I think these days people understand that easier. Imagine Trump's a Pakistani and he's sitting there. He's going to ask, well, how much did you invest in my country? Did you invest $30 billion worth in my country? Do you take that much in exports from me? So why am I paying 30 billion debt servicing to you? Let's say if I remove the debt servicing and I cannot trade with you and I'm not going to get investment. Well, you're not investing in me and I don't have a trade surplus with you. So what does it affect me? What does it affect me that if I don't pay debt servicing to you? Right? So this is a mentality. So the wealth is there, the means is there. And then you might say, okay, fine, if you take these very aggressive steps, then the world would not trade with you. They're not trading with us anyways. Right? It's really China that trades with us. And China doesn't care. China doesn't care. If you have the cash, they'll give you what you need. And they pretty much produce the world's goods. So in a way, your economy doesn't really lose anything from a commodities and consumer goods standpoint, right? But obviously you spend that money, then invest in things that help elevate the nature of your economy. So you have a very powerful, you have the potential for a very powerful R&D base within Pakistan. So for example, Pakistan's nuclear program, it hasn't worked it's been capped artificially because of US sanctions, but there's a genuine R&D pool there. People, infrastructure, and knowledge that can result in things like small modular reactors. They can do it if they're given the funding and the space to do it, but they're not given that space or funding. So they're constrained. But you can unlock that capability and become a real nuclear technology power, right? For example, in the 70s, before Bhutto came in, Pakistan had a pretty good industrial capacity. It was comparable to South Korea, Taiwan. When the PPP government at the time came in, they nationalized those industries and destroyed them. So it's not because Pakistanis or Pakistan itself lacks the capability. It's always government or elite intervention that dampens the environment and prevents it from flourishing. So all that is there. If you just have a sincere, competent leadership, this stuff will just germinate and spread out really quickly. And especially a leadership that connects the dots effectively. That goes again, I go back, like it is able to build the strategic depth of Afghanistan, for example. So they have minerals and resources there. You have industrialists who are able to invest, who don't want to invest because they don't want to lose their investments. They can go out there from Pakistan, from Punjab, Sindh, whatever. They can go out there and invest in Afghanistan and get those minerals moving, right? You have people who are able to develop basic refinery capabilities for the nuclear program. You can get them to scale and expand that with your funds, and then they can go into more advanced mineral research and development and start refining those minerals much more effectively. There's so many different things a sincere leadership can see and do that is it's just scary sometimes, and that's what the world knows. America knows this, right? It is scary, and that's the reason why the world has such an interest in containing, limiting, and frankly, I would say even disenchanting Pakistanis constantly of the promise that they have.
Jazakallah for that answer. I really want to go into more depth and more discussion, but I know the time is, we've only got you for a period of time. So inshallah, hopefully we'll get you back on again and discuss this issue, particularly if the issue develops again or differently. So Jazakallah khair, brother Bilal. Bilal is a military strategist expert who has discussed and written various papers and is cited by various academics and journals, as well as media outlets. Any final points that you want to mention, Bilal? Anything that you want to mention about the work that you do, or?
Not so much about the work, but I would say, look, if you're a Pakistani and you're coming out of this, be optimistic for the right reasons. Don't take up how many aircraft you lost or won as your benchmark. Rather, look at the fact that you're able to stand up to a regional aggressor, right, successfully, and build on that. Take that mentality and say, look, we can be the country that we can be the heroic country, right? We can be the country that gets honored and respected throughout the world and win, right? Take that mentality and build on it productively, and just really look into your history, your ideations, your ideas and thoughts, like in the sense of like like your everything from Islam and onwards, right? Like just look back and start using that as the launch point for coming up towards a solution. Stop caring about whether the world sees you as a victim or as a good citizen or not. That's not the metric. The metric is, are we as a society prospering, and are we affecting what we believe to be, like, are we making are we spreading what we believe to be right across our borders and that kind of thing. And that's the mentality you should take, basically.
I think also it's really important that there's very few countries out there in the Muslim world that has that, the capacity to do what it did against. I think India is considered the fourth or fifth, largest military power in the world, and be able to be comparable in terms of being able to defend itself and even strike blows against India. But the thing is, Pakistan is not just Pakistan. Pakistan could be seen as the leadership of the entire Muslim world because of its capabilities, because of its resources, because it's the fifth largest populated nation in the world. So, Pakistan and Pakistanis need to stop sort of seeing themselves as a nationalistic entity and start seeing themselves as part of a global ummah that could potentially lead the global ummah. What do you say about that, Bilal?
I agree. And the fact is, I think in Pakistan we have this really corrosive saying, like what so-called, they make fun of there's some figures, some personalities in Pakistan who make fun of the idea of the ummah and brotherhood. And then they'll give you like statements from some regime in the Arab world. Like, this is not how you measure whether brotherhood exists or not. In reality, people, when they're aware, they will generally side with the Muslims, right? In a conflict scenario between a Muslim and a non-Muslim power. And this is a public opinion when they have awareness in general. I think you have people, for example, from Bosnia, Turkey, like basically saying they support Bosnia. You have even news journalists from within the Arab world basically go out and say, yeah, like Pakistan, they shot down a Rafale. Like these guys are really skilled pilots. Clearly, so people they resonate with respect. right? They respect those who display courage, leadership, and vision. So as Pakistanis, we need to start exemplifying that. We need to start, if you're sick of being the joke, or the butt of every joke, then establish yourself as a leader and act like that, right? Don't act as a passive follower.
Jazakallah khair, Bilal. I appreciate you coming on. Inshallah, hopefully we'll have you on again. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.